Hello, awesome students. I hope you all are doing well, and that you all are getting ready for a nice break. Um, Today, I'm going to be talking with you all about Chicanx and Latinx hip hop, um, and just a brief lecture about the how these groups played a role in the origination of hip hop and hip hop culture. And so I'm gonna just take you through a little bit of time, and of course, once again, it's that same thing. I can't. There's no way I can share like all the artists, so I just picked artists that I'm pretty aware of, and I know how much of a role they played and things like that. But like I said, there's no way I could talk about every single. It's just like the metal one or the punk and metal one. Like there is no way that I could go over all of that in this short amount of time. And so let's go ahead and I'm also not going to play some songs on this one just because last time the copyright thing I got dinged for YouTube. So I did make a playlist that you guys can check out with some of the artists I'm talking about today. So Chicanx and Latinx hip hop, starting a culture within a culture, and that's basically what ends up happening is like hip hop ends up being a culture, just like we talked about with punk or metal. You know, like it ends up being how people identify, not only with just style and things like that, but also like the way of life, right? And so hip hop is that, and hip hop's crazy because just like we saw with like corridos and even like so other songs and stuff like that from the past, we get to see that same idea of like sharing stories and doing storytelling and sharing narratives. Sorry, my allergies are kicking today. Through music, and that's another whole like amazing element that is important to discuss in regard to hip hop, because it continues that idea of like um, uh, the storytelling, right? Sharing the narratives, like we saw with corridos or other tunes, right? Or other genres. Um, Hip hop continues that, but the thing that's kind of cool is it modernizes it, right? Um, it modernizes it, and so we see that this ends up being something that causes openness and an understanding of the experience of certain people. But let's go ahead and talk a little bit about um, how it all originated. So basically, hip hop started in New York City in the Bronx, and this is in the 70s. And before that, there was music around that inspired. There'll be inspiration for hip hop, but the actual stylings and genre of music started in the 70s and in mid 70s in Bronx, New York. And one thing that was kind of cool about learning about this is that it all started like kind of on a low end level, like where it was like at parties, like house parties, and like even like rec centers, um, where people started first with DJing, right? And then dance and then MCing. And MCing was like straight up originally like master of ceremonies, right? That's what it stood for. And basically the MCs were the ones that ran the whole show. And it was like DJs doing their thing while people were breaking and b-boying and doing all this stuff. Well, then the MC started rapping over the tracks and stuff like that. And then next thing you know, like it starts happening and spreading all over the place. And it was almost like I like calling hip hop like grassroots because that's kind of how it was. Like it was like punk rock, how the DIY kind of mentality, and they started pushing all these events and lessons and stuff like that. And then next thing you know, artists are being picked up, and they were becoming a part of the scene and the culture. And so that ended up being something that was crucial to the experience, you know, and to understanding what the experience was like. And so half of being able to acknowledge um what it was to be a part of some of these groups and part of some of this culture. But I'm going to talk about different things because it's not just about the music; it's also about the dance and also about the art forms that come from hip hop. And so let's talk about the beginnings of hip hop. And so for us as Chicanos and Latinos, this happened in the Bronx, and that's an area where there's predominantly a lot of Afro Cuban Afro Latinos or Latinos from the Caribbean, right? And so they were part of that whole process of the origination or beginning of hip hop. And so people like this dude here is DJ Charlie Chase. His real name was Carlos Mendez, and he was Puerto Rican. And he was the DJ for Cold Crush Brothers, and he also ended up being the DJ for the Furious Five. Like, don't stop now, cause I'm close to the edge. Like he's the DJ on that track, and he also DJed alongside Funkmaster Flex. He was big from 1975 even to now, and so he was one of the first well-known DJs. And he even ended up with the Cold Crush Brothers. He ended up being the first rap group to be signed to CBS Records. So that's huge, right? The other cat is this gentleman here, Pumpkin. And so Pumpkin was a legendary music producer, and he was of Costa Rican and Afro-Panamanian descent, but he was known as King of the Beat. And he was a drummer originally, and then he ended up he's the one that ended up coming up with break beats. And so he was a true pioneer for hip hop. And he worked with the OG artists like Treacherous 3, Grandmaster Caz, Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Spoonie G. All these artists from like the mid 70s all the way into the mid 80s that were like the originators of hip hop. So he was huge with that too in the scene. Another group was the Mean Machine here, and these guys were on Sugar Hill Records, and that was like Sugar Hill Gang. You guys know that rappers are like look at hip hop, a hippie to the hip hop, you don't stop rocking. Um, they were part of that same record label, and the thing that was kind of cool is they were the first bilingual rap groups ever. They were the first ones that rapped in Spanish and English, which was pretty cool. They were mostly made up of individuals who were Puerto Rican. So that was Mr. Chic, DJ Julio, DJ Mr. Nice, and we're all Puerto Rican descent. And then Jimmy Mack was another artist who was added later on. But the original three, they were the dudes, and they had their one of the first big hits for rap ever or hip hop ever, and that was Disco Dream. And that's one of the I put tracks from all these musicians on the playlist so you can hear some of their stuff. But these are part of the origination of hip hop as far as like music's concerned. And I went like old school here because like it's important to understand like this is in the 70s that these individuals are taking off with it and bringing it to the masses, if you will, right? The next part is about breaking and b-boy, right? And so probably the most well-known b-boy group or breakdancing crew was the Rocksteady crew, this crew right here. And most of the individuals from the Rocksteady crew are of Latino descent, Puerto Ricans and Dominicans, which is pretty awesome. So the Rocksteady crew was made up of these individuals who were from New York, and ended up being also of Latino descent that started this whole huge push and inspiration of having breakdancing. And so they throw the break beats up with the DJ, and these guys would go at it, and ladies would go at it, and just dancing it up. And then you guys know the Electric Boogaloo crew, right? From the breaking movies, like they were an actual crew. It wasn't just like, oh, we're just gonna throw these dudes together. So that's he's Ozone in breaking, but his real name is Shabadoo, and he was Puerto Rican. Or he is Puerto Rican, and and most of the people in his crew were also Latinos. And so they started off by inspiring people to join the hip hop culture through breakdancing. And so that was a big element as well. Is like it wasn't just about DJing, but also breaking, and then later on MCing, right? Too. So a lot of these people would do like all of it. Some of them were like a DJ, a breakdancer, and also a sorry, my kids are in the background making noise. Um, also dancing and then MCing later on. And so that's kind of a cool element of it. And these are the main crews, and then now we even have more, and Rocksteady Crew's still a thing. Like they still dance and do all this stuff. Like Crazy Legs is like, I don't even know how old now, in his 50s or even like late 50s, and he's still out there breaking. Another part of the culture that ends up being picked up too and started by and spearheaded by Latinos is the graffiti culture and the art, right? So you have like one of the pioneers is Stacy 168, or Tracy. Sorry, I don't know why I said Stacy. Tracy 168, and he was one of the pioneers. He is of Puerto Rican descent. Um, and he started out by inventing the wild style graffiti style, where you have like basically overlapping and interlocking letters and arrows and curves, and things that make words hard to even read, right? But that wild style graffiti, which ended up being like he's one of the first people that started putting pieces up on trains so people could see them all over the place. um, Started doing that, and that's a picture of him with one of his pieces on a train. It says Tracy. Another one of the artists is Tats Crew, and Tats Crew. Well, all of these artists that I'm sharing with you today still do stuff. Like they're still active in the graffiti community, and this is one of Tats Crew's one of his newer pieces. Um, but once again, another individual, and he started out, and this was like in the '70s. Tracy 168, and then he started out like in the early '80s, late '70s too. Tats Crew. Um, and his tag name is Bio, and his name is Wilfredo Feliciano, and he's also Puerto Rican descent. Um, but his pieces are up all over the place, even globally. And his he took that whole wild style and like up the ante on it, right? And then we also have individuals like Lee Quinones, right here. It's with Howard the Duck, and then it says Lee there. Um, Lee Quinones is a New Rican artist. That's like a New York Puerto Rican, um, and he was huge in the movement. His first subway pieces were done like in 1974 and 1975. So right when we're seeing the hip hop movement start, that's when we see him beginning too with all his pieces. And he was actually part of the Furious Five graffiti crew, and he painted like everything from subway cars to walls, you name it, all over the place. And they actually made a documentary called Style Wars in 1983, and he was one of the people that was focused on for the film. And he also ended up being doing collaborations with like Nike and Adidas and companies like that. The other one, like bringing in the ladies, because I know like a lot of times we end up hearing about these genres of music starting and they're like really like male heavy in their history. This is not so. Just like I said, with like there was female DJs and stuff like that too, but most of them were going to come later on. Um, but early on, in regard to like breaking and stuff like that, we saw that there was ladies involved in like Rocksteady Crew and even the Electric Boogaloo, um, same thing, but also with graffiti. This is Lady Pink. She ends up being a legendary icon in graffiti. She was raised in New York. I think she's Ecuadorian though, descent, and so she ends up being very important in the graffiti movement, and she's also known as the first lady of graffiti. And in 1982, she starred in the movie Wild Style with other pioneers of the culture of hip hop. So pretty cool history in regard to that. So now I want to talk a little bit about the music and like how it um, uh, was implemented and also how it changed over time, like in different areas. So we hear about like a lot of the East Coast community starting it, right? But then it also transpired and moved, or it uh, um, or moved over from one coast, or went transcontinental. That's what I meant. So not only globally, but like across. At first, it started across the United States, and so that was the rise of West Coast hip hop and rap, right? And so this happens like in like 1983, 1984, and then even goes all the way into like the early 90s, right? And so we get these artists that come into the mix, um, like Mellow Man Ace right here, and he had that song Mentirosa, straight up Mentirosa, like that song. And he's actually Cuban American, but from California. And then we also have other artists like Kid Frost. I'm doing this one for La Raza, you know that song. I don't know if you've heard that. All of these, all of these artists have a song on the playlist, so you guys can check them out too for this week. That way you can hear some of the tracks that they made. Kid Frost, Mexican American, from California too, and he brought in that whole like Chicano style rap beginning. And then we also have people like Lighter Shade of Brown. Lighter Shade of Brown, same thing. They think they were from Victorville or something, Riverside, California. And they brought in that whole element too. And it was more like some of them were like social awareness. Like even like Frost talks a lot about like what it's like kind of being a Chicano growing up in these areas. And then Lighter Shade of Brown had that like party vibe to them, and you'll hear that too in their song. Uh, that you'll listen to on the playlist. And then you also have other groups like Cypress Hill. Cypress Hill blew up huge in the early 90s, and they took off like and leading, paving the way for a lot of other artists after. But they were like stoner hip hop, so you're talking about smoking weed all day and all that stuff. So like they really inspired a lot of other artists to go that route as well. And so and they're a mixture of individuals. So you have Be Real, who is Mexican and Cuban, and then Sendog is Cuban American from, and then we have DJ, I can't remember his name, DJ, what, I can't remember, Knuckles or something like that, and he's also a Mexican American. Um, and they end up being inspiring for other groups. Then you have groups like Brownside. Brownside was signed by Ruthless Records, who is Easy E's label, from NWA, and so he signed Brownside, and they were kind of like the NWA for Mexicanos or Chicanos, right? And so they told the story of what it was like to be Mexican American uh, in California, right? And then you have Delinquent Habits, and they were another group that was kind of mixed too. So they had like African American members, but also Latino or Chicano members, and they had a good run too with bringing up kind of the same thing, like the everyday life of a Chicano kid growing up in the hood and stuff like that. So it was cool. Like I remember listening to all these artists growing up, and they were very inspiring for me as a musician, and then also as like a little weird brown kid. Like I was tell Professor Sanchez, like, like these people all inspired us weird brown kids to do something, and that's kind of cool. And then moving along now, because I don't want to keep us for too long. The next one is like the rise of Latinos in the '90s, and like I said, there's by no means am I hitting all the artists, because there's a bunch of like Nore, there's like Capone Noriega, like there's like a bunch of different artists that come out of this time in hip hop. Um, but I'm focusing on these because these are some of the artists that I share in the playlist. And so AZ, I can't remember his last name. His name is Alfredo or Antonio or something like that. Zaiban or something like that. And he is from Sugar Hill, in New York, and he ends up having the song Sugar Hill, and it was a hit on the Billboard charts. But he was a Latino dude. He's Puerto Rican and Dominican, I think. And so that was huge, like having an artist, and even like he had a couple tracks on that album that he used Spanish on too. But the big one is Big Pun. So Big Pun of the Terror Squad. This was his album Capital Punishment, and that's the one that has like I don't want to be a player no more with Joe. And Big Pun was the first Latino artist to go platinum in hip hop, and so that was huge because that was an important thing to see that people were really digging the Latino hip hop vibe during this time, right? And it was globally, like that's huge to be able to be an artist at that level of sales, right? And so people were buying his tracks and listening to him, and it was all over the radio, and I remember him using like and he had like quite a few songs that had Spanish and English in them, and that was cool. Like even that song like Boricua Morena, like that's like straight up like Puerto Rican indigenous groups, right? And so like that's some cool shit whenever you're thinking about it. The next one of my favorites, and I had to put these dudes on there, is just because I really love a lot of their tracks too. Is the Beatnuts. The Beatnuts Musical Massacre was a great album. One of my favorite songs ever is from them is Watch Out Now, and that's one I put on the playlist. But these dudes were mean, and they brought in they used a lot of Spanish in their lyrics and stuff like that too, and talked about the culture and things like that, and I mean even just like the everyday dealings of a New Yorican, in New York, and it kind of like um, tells these stories, right? And that's what's amazing about it. But it's really cool to have been alive while these artists were really pumping out some really good music. And then I like that song just because it has some old school like flute in it, and you'll hear it and you'll be like, oh damn, like that's so cool to have that in there, um, in a hip hop song, and not like Lizzo, like it's like indigenous flute, if you will, right? The next one too is Chicano hip hop and reggaeton. So the rise of like um, West Coast rap introduced a lot of Chicano artists and stuff like that into the mix, but it kind of fell off for a little bit in the '90s, and then it blew up again in the 2000s when we had artists start to sorry, my head is like these things like digging into my skull. Um, but we had artists that were of Chicano or Mexican American descent that were or heritage that ended up being huge, like South Park Mexican, SPM. Like I put some of one of his tracks on there too, and then everybody knows Little Rob, like the little cholo guy, right? And that's one thing that's kind of cool is like he came out. This is in like the early 2000s, and he was like a cholo, like little hat, that little he looks like Orly's Lowrider magazine's logo, his face with the mad dogs and like that was him and it was cool because we forgot about that experience and then he brings it back in these really poppy sounding hip hop songs um that are fun to dance to and stuff like that. And then we also have more new artists like Serio, and Serio is like a more talks about going back to that whole style of talking about like what it's like in the hood, and his song is like Don't Hate Me Because I'm Mexican, and that's one of the songs that you'll hear on there. And then there's like this girl is like so underrated. Like I don't know why she's not blown up more as Snow the Product. And like she gets it, man. Like she can really rhyme, and she does really great flows, and like even her like the things that I like best about her freestyles. Like if you ever want to watch some of her freestyles, they're just amazing. And she's a Chicana from Los Angeles or from California. I don't remember what. I think she's from Los Angeles. But she's just amazing. So I put one of her tracks on there too. One of the other dudes I want to talk about too that's like coming up around the same time is that style of reggaeton. And so reggaeton artists like Daddy Yankee, who's the one that like kind of like really takes off with it, and then like going back to hip hop. And I should have included his picture on here was the Nore or Noriega like me, yo, but he's actually not. His name is Victor Santiago, and they are the ones that really introduced the reggaeton style of hip hop to the pop culture movement, and so it's really cool. And like I said, it has those same influences like we talked about. I think I even shared Gasolina on for mine for African influences in the rhythms, right, for our playlist. Yeah, so he's another artist that really took off with it and pushed it, and now with reggaeton is even like you even hear them the beat style and like Ed Sheeran songs and stuff like that. And so that's important. But these artists are all more new, that are bringing out this. And there's artists, like I said, that I didn't even talk about that are on there that are also important. But I'm gonna go ahead and end there. Hopefully, this was informative for you all. But hip hop's still alive and well, and we see our beginnings and how Latinos and Chicanos played a role. Um, in the development, the continuation of the narrative of hip hop. So hopefully you enjoyed this, and we'll see you soon. Have a good one.